From his experience with the railroad, Carnegie knew the Civil War had worn out thousands of miles of track. He knew the rails would have to be replaced and was determined it would be with Carnegie iron. But a new process had been developed that for the first time produced the iron alloy steel cheaply and in great quantities. In 1856, British inventor Henry Bessemer observed that a great burst of flame would erupt when a blast of cold air was injected into a container of molten pig iron.
Well, what Bessemer was trying to do was to get the carbon out, and he devised a method of blowing air through molten pig iron in a pear-shaped converter. The air was forced through the iron. It came up from the bottom under pressure, and it oxidized the carbon that was in the iron. And then Bessemer got the bright idea, well, if you can stop this conversion at just the right time, maybe you will have just the right tiny amount of carbon to produce steel.
Rails made with steel were far superior to those of iron, but Carnegie was reluctant to utilize the revolutionary technique, claiming that pioneering don't pay. But then he saw the Bessemer process, witnessed pig iron transformed into a river of steel in minutes. By combining his ironworks with new steel mills, Carnegie believed he could produce steel faster and cheaper than anyone.
Andrew Carnegie used the Bessemer process to begin smelting steel. That was a revolution because we could use steel rails for trains rather than iron. Steel was stronger and much more durable than iron. And we could also build skyscrapers and elevators as a result of steel. In fact, the city of Chicago became a laboratory for steel because it was burned in the early 1870s, and it was rebuilt in the period from 1875 to 1900, and that's the first great instance of using steel in this country.
In 1872, Carnegie announced his plans to build his first integrated steel mill. The age of iron is past, Carnegie claimed. Steel is king.
His company will not only produce the pig iron, they will be able to roll, they will be able to take the pig iron, make it into steel through the Bessemer process, and then also build the steel rail rolling mill all together.
With the visionary, opportunistic Carnegie leading the way, the age of steel had begun. Steel has always been the beast of American industry, and the making of steel among the most spectacular industrial processes on earth. And steel work is the toughest job of all. Without automation or safety regulations, steel work in the 1800s was also the most dangerous. By 1880, thousands of workers manned the 16 iron and steel mills that were stretched along the rivers and outskirts of Pittsburgh. The largest employer was Andrew Carnegie. With an eye to the future, Carnegie hired experts in the Bessemer process and ordered them to spare no expense in building the finest, most technologically advanced steel mill in the world.
He brings in the very best people to design the mill and run the mill who have experience. In other words, he buys the best talent possible, brings them in. The mill opens 3 years later, right in the teeth of a depression, 1875, and within months, it becomes the best producing steel rail mill in the country. Railroads are exploding across the country, so there's tremendous demand. It's going to make him fabulously wealthy. So he has, in effect, single-handedly led the charge.
It was known as America's first $1 million mill. Carnegie rolled out 10,000 tons of steel a month, double the output of his nearest competitor.
What Carnegie did was to take the Bessemer technology and apply it in an extremely efficient and coordinated way so that he could lower costs of steel production And eventually he created this sprawling steel plant called the J. Edgar Thompson Steel Works, and became the nation's leading steel manufacturer through ruthless cost cutting and efficient operation.
But even with yearly earnings of close to $2 million, Carnegie wasn't satisfied. One of his subordinates claimed Carnegie cared not a lick about profits, only costs. Carnegie's continual demand for lower costs often pushed his workers to the limits of endurance.
They worked intensely long hours in very dangerous conditions. The work week, the standard work week in the steel industry was 84 hours per week. And they worked for very low wages. For 84 hours of brutal labor in the steel mills was often less than $10 a week.
A blast furnace is incredibly hot because you have to heat that molten steel over 2,000 degrees to get it to melt and to be able to work with it. You're dealing with very hot conditions. You're dealing with conditions that are also inherently dangerous because that hot steel can burn you and cripple you and scar you and even kill you very quickly if you don't know what you're doing with it.
Yet, despite dangerous working conditions, Carnegie ordered his men to keep the river of steel flowing day and night. Despite hardships, over the next decade, Carnegie Steel Works supplied metal for many of the nation's major construction projects. Beams and girders for the Brooklyn Bridge, steel for New York's elevated trains, metal for the nation's first skyscrapers, the Washington Monument, thousands of miles of rails, all made from the empire built by the poor boy from Scotland. By 1890, Carnegie was the richest man in America. His net worth estimated at over $100 million. In today's dollars, he was a billionaire. By the 1890s, Andrew Carnegie was producing more steel than all of Great Britain. Well into his 60s, Carnegie was increasingly managing his empire from his castle in Scotland. Yet, the tycoon still maintained a firm control over his empire. In 1896, the market for pig iron was $20 a ton. Carnegie ordered his price slashed to $17. When the price for steel rails reached an all-time low of $100 a ton, Carnegie cut his by 30%. And in 1898, Carnegie announced his boldest move yet. His company would expand beyond the heavy steel market into the manufacturing of specialty steel products.
Carnegie threatened to start manufacturing a number of types of steel commodities that he had not manufactured up until that time, like wire, for example, or other specialized grades of steel. Well, this thoroughly alarmed the steel industry, as Carnegie knew it would, because he was such a well-known competitor. He was so ruthless that it was felt if he started to manufacture other products, he would just drive many companies to the wall.
America's industrial barons wanted Carnegie stopped. If unchecked, Carnegie could destroy them as he had countless others. There was only one force equal to the task: the Wizard of Wall Street, tycoon of railroads and oil, investment banker J.P. Morgan. By 1900, Morgan had used his Merlin-like skill to amass great wealth, controlling a variety of railroads and banks. He was a genius at mergers, acquisitions, and buyouts. But buying out Carnegie Steel, the biggest concern in America, seemed impossible, even for the mighty Morgan. Morgan asked Schwab to find out if Carnegie would sell. Schwab relayed the message during a round of golf. After putting out, Carnegie scratched a number on a slip of paper. The next day, Morgan glanced at the number, and the deal was done. They had just completed the largest private transaction in history, $492 million. It made Carnegie the wealthiest man in the world.
The story goes that after the deal was consummated, Carnegie said to Morgan, "I should have charged you $100 million more." And Morgan replied, "Andy, I would have paid it."
By merging Carnegie's empire with 11 other companies, Morgan had created the largest company in U.S. history. He named it U.S. Steel.
United States Steel was not just another corporate entity coming on the scene in the United States. It was the world's first really large holding company, and the billion-dollar mark was a kind of crowning achievement of J.P. Morgan's that he would wear proudly the rest of his life.